What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over the final episode of the character select screen for the Super Smash Brothers tutorial. In today's episode specifically, we're going to be doing a little bit of an overhaul to allow other players to switch their character and their skin and all that in a much nicer way. This way you can incorporate however many characters you want without adding extra variables every time. This will be very important. It'll make it very easy to swap characters in and out. So if you want to have player 2 join, but then player 3 drops out, we'll be able to do that very easily using the methods I'm going to show you today. Also, we're going to add functionality to be able to change our character's skin or outfit or palette swap, color, whatever we want to call it, by clicking on the character after we've selected them. Just like this, okay? Now, in today's episode, we won't get into actually bringing the changed character's color, or the changed color on the character, into the scene, because we need to do some stuff with the mesh, and this video is going to be pretty loaded already. But you will have all the functionality down from the widget, so we will be able to easily incorporate it into the scene in another episode, probably the next episode we do of this. But to show you, we'll be able to click on this, and we will have our character. Okay, if we go into our character select screen widget that we made in the other episodes, and now would be a good time to say, if you haven't watched the other episodes in this series, you might want to start from episode 1 to kind of catch up and get familiar with where we are. If you're just interested in the character select screen widget, I will link you to the iCard in the top right now. That has the link for episode 1 of the character select screen. This is episode 3 and the final one for now. If not, and you'd like to catch up on the entire series, I will link the very first Super Smash Brothers tutorial episode right here. Alright, so let's continue on. In the last episode, we had the coin working, and you could click on these, or you could leave the coin on these buttons, and things would be good to go. And we had a continue button that you'd have to click to confirm your actual decision for what character you wanted. Now, since we're going to be incorporating skins and stuff, we need a way to display that. What we want to add is an image for every character we're going to have. You can also put a button behind it, which I would recommend, because that's how we're going to click on it to determine if we should change their color or not. So I put in 5, which is a very arbitrary amount. What you'd probably want is 1 with 8, and then as players drop in and out, you take them away, or 1 with 4, and you can take them in and out. Different things like that. Just like Super Smash Brothers does it, they have actually multiple HUDs depending on the size they want to use. Like if they're only expecting 4 players, then they put in 4 of these guys, and then the ones that aren't used are just filled with an AI slot. We will get into that later in the episode, or excuse me, later in the series, but for now, just put however many you want. I put 5. I'll probably make it 8. I just kind of threw some on there. Doesn't make a difference for now. We're only going to be using the first one today. But add a button. Literally drag it onto the scene. And then add an image. Drag that into the scene. Probably should have them as children. In fact, it would make more sense. But for me, I just put them separate. Made sure they were the same size, same dimensions. That way, the image was fully covering the button. You see, if I drag it away, you can see the button there. What we have to do on these images is name them whatever you want. I just called player 1, character image, go 1 through 8, however many. We need to click on the image. Make sure you have the image selected, not the button. Sometimes you can see something on top, click on it, and you're actually clicking on the thing behind it. So sometimes you'll click on this and you'll actually be on the button. It's weird, I know. I'm not entirely sure why it happens. It might be a layering thing. But just make sure when you click on an object that the one that is highlighted is the image. Scroll down on the details panel on the right, and you can go to behavior, visibility, not hit testable. You can do self and all children or just self only. What not hit testable does is it doesn't allow this image, this object that has this setting on, to be touched with the mouse or interacted with. But that we can essentially click through it. So if we click on this image, like we do here, what we're doing is actually clicking on the button behind it. You can see the button is highlighting as I hover over. That's what's going on. So this white image has been replaced with the image that we want to use for the character here. And now we're actually clicking on the button behind it. This is essentially the same thing we've done for these icons in the first episode. But that's what's going on here. So when I click the button, then we change the picture that is on top. Okay? And this warning, I mentioned this warning before, we're actually not going to get rid of it in today's episode, not to be a liar. We're going to get rid of it in another episode because this episode's already going to encompass a lot. So don't worry about that warning. It won't hurt anything for now. We'll get rid of it to make things cleaner in one of the next episodes. Probably the next one, but I said that last time, so, you know, could be a few episodes. Anyway, that's all you're doing. You're putting a button here. You're putting an image that is a higher Z order. Like I put 10 for the image, the button is 0. Ones that are higher will be rendered last, meaning they will be drawn on top, as it says right here. So once you do this, you're good to go. You have your buttons that you can click on, and you have your images. Make sure your buttons are all variables. And your images, because we're going to change the actual image that's on the brush. So make sure all of these have the is variable box checked right here. This will be very important. But that's all for the designer view. Let's get into the graph. Okay, so the event graph has got a lot going on, and a lot of it we have already done, but I'm going to be changing the way we did a lot of it to make it easier. It's going to be a lot right now, but it will essentially make it so no matter how many characters you have, no matter how many times people, turn on their controller, turn it off, log in, drop out, whatever, this system will support it. So I'd highly recommend switching to this, even though it's more complicated and will require to change a few things. For one, we have to set up something in the code to switch the way we were doing it before. So the way we were previously doing this is we had an array of characters. It was game instance array. It was an array of our players. So we were using our players array to keep track of everybody in the game. Great. That works, but it doesn't have a lot of the information we need, right? The player was just holding the class. We want to make a struct, or a structure, which essentially is an object that has other objects in it, is the easiest way to describe it. And it'll make more sense once we do it in the code. But we want to make a structure that kind of holds everything we need. So if you go into your code class, and if you've been following the tutorial, you'll have something called the base game instance. If not, and this is the first episode you're joining in on, that's fine. Just make a new game instance, so make a new class in Unreal. New C++ class, and show all classes, and look for your base or game instance right here. Make a class off of this. Okay? Once you do that, open up your Visual Studio, go to the header file. You don't have to necessarily add this stuff. Again, you do things the way you would like to do them if you're not following this tutorial specifically, but this is all I have in this class. So we have this character class, Inu. This determines what character we actually are. Right now I only have 2 mannequins, mannequin, mannequin 2. But essentially this is your Mario, Luigi, Captain Falcon, whatever. It's your character. I'm calling it character class because it actually relates to the code class that we're going to be setting up for each character. But essentially, this is your character. What we need to do, instead of using just this, because this isn't enough, we need to know our skin. The player's name as well is going to be good. We're not going to do anything with this today, but you know how you can assign your names and they go above your head in Super Smash Brothers? This is what we're going to set up here in the player name. Again, not going to do it today, but feel free to add it today while we're here. Okay? And then we also need our class. So we need our class, our skin, and our name. That's the 3 things that make up a player right now. I'm sure we'll be adding to it in the future, but these 3 things are going to be important for differentiating all of our characters. Now, we did have a players before, but the players array, I believe, was called characters, first of all. And second of all, it was actually an array of this class, this character class. We're switching that around now. So we made this struct. This is how you make a struct in C++. It's essentially the same as a class, but we don't have to get into the specifics. Basically, this is an object that has objects in it, right? So what it is a variable of whatever type we call it. So struct f player details. You need this generated body. It's just something that Unreal does. Don't worry about it for now. Just add it. Then make sure your 3 variables are edit, anywhere, blueprint, read, write. So feel free to copy this code if you want, but just understand what's happening is we're making the character skin or the character color, character outfit, whatever we're calling it, and assigning that to an integer. So whatever integer we have is the result in the array of skins that we'll have. It'll make sense once we get into it. F string for your player name, and then your E character class, which is your enum here. So Mario, Captain Falcon, whatever. Then down here we have a T array, which is an array of this. So what this represents, this player details, is a player. This has all the information that our player will need. Not necessarily our character, but our player. So we can also do things like assign our controller here, or assign controller presets or something like that. If a certain player likes having their controls set up a certain way, that's how you can assign this stuff here. So this array that we're making of this structure, you can see it's of f player details, which is what we made right here, is your players array. This is the new players array. This is what we're going to be using. Again, I think it was called characters before. We're switching that out for players because player now has the character class. I also have this num players in base game instance. We actually have this variable already. It exists in the game mode. You can keep it in the game mode. I know that seems weird. The game mode and the game instance can be different. So for example, the game instance could have 8 players logged in. The game instance goes throughout your entire game. It's not, the game mode that we have set up is intended to work when we're fighting players on the stage. The game instance will work throughout the menus, when you're fighting the enemies on the stage, when you're at the credits, it will always be here. We can use it to transfer data to different parts of the game. So you can keep num players for your game mode if you want and use that specifically for fighters on your stage. Num players in this case is referring to either how many players are signed in or how many players have a controller connected, whatever we want to use it for like that. But it'll be very useful for the character selection screen because we can determine how many characters we need to give control over. And you'll see that when we get into it. But this is all we're doing in the code. I know it's a lot, but you can copy it if you're not comfortable or don't fully understand it. It should click more as we go throughout the tutorial. Let's go ahead and copy that. Nothing in the CPP file, so don't worry. Haven't done anything there. Let's go back into Unreal and let's get started. There's not a ton we have to do here. It's going to be a lot of changes. So before we had a bunch of stuff where we had things like character class array and player name array and all these different things. We don't want all that, honestly. We don't want to have a variable for each character. We do, but we want to store it in an array. So you can see here how I have player 1 has coin, player 2 has coin. This will be changed in another episode when we get into multiplayer menus, where multiple people can work on the menu at the same time. But this is what I was talking about. See how we have 2 variables, player 1 is coin, player 2 is coin? We don't want that. We want to put these into arrays. So we're going to get into how to do that, but this is kind of what I'm getting at. In the last episode, we made a game instance reference. Just take note of this because we're going to need to use that. So if you don't have one, make a variable and assign it to your game instance. So add a new variable, click on your type in the game instance class, get an object reference. Then this stuff's all the same, so I'm not going to go over all of it because again, video is going to be too long. But feel free to look this over if you need a refresher. Essentially, we're setting the user focus of the widget, listening in case they press the spacebar, which is the action menu grab coin that we set up. That way, if we press the spacebar, we grab the coin, and then we can do stuff with it. Makes sense? Then we get our game instance, cast it to our base game instance, and if that succeeds, then we set our game instance reference variable that we made earlier. We make sure we're showing our cursor because we want to see it. Now we're doing some new stuff here. This whole section right here is new. What we're going to do is essentially figure out how many player controllers exist. We're going to get the length of that, and then we're going to set num players. Now, there's 2 things we could do here. if we do it this way, and this way is probably the proper way if you plan on doing this outside of the computer. So even if you're doing it with the computer, but you plan on having multiple controllers and not keyboard input. I'll show you what's going on here. So if I select my character, you'll actually see the HUD does not show up for the other players. That is not technically a bug with what we're doing, but this is where it comes from. This right here, since I'm just using the keyboard and we were faking different players last time, doing this functionality, get all actors of class player controller, will actually screw that up. So you might want to switch this to get all actors of class and then choose like your base fighter class. SSB template character won't work though because they're not spawned yet. So you would have to do this later in the game mode, but you could do it like that. You could also set num players arbitrarily. Oh, I'm going into this game mode, I want 4 players. So instead of connecting this to any of this garbage, just say set num players 4. Great, and you're good to go. So when you see my HUD not working later, that's actually what it is. I want to make this known because if you're just doing this all on keyboard, there's plenty of other ways to figure this out. I did this because we're going to have multiplayer menus, and I wanted to account for it early. We'll go over it again in that episode, so no stress, but that's where this is coming in to play. So we're setting a number of players based on the number of player controllers. Essentially, we're saying, based on the number of inputs I have, this is how many people should be able to pick characters. Then, because of the way coding is, 0 is your first index. So we're going to grab our number of players, subtract 1 from it, which I don't need to be doing this, by the way, so I'm going to actually take this out to make things neater. Oops. Usually I try not to do this while we're recording, but this way you can kind of see what's going on. So still do the same thing here. Get your length, or regardless how you do it, set your number of players. This is the most important part here. Now, if we have 1 player, we have to get the last index that we want to use. Since we're going to do a for loop for all of our players. So, if we've got 1 player, 1 minus 1 is 0, last index is 0, we're still going to loop once. That's what we want. That's why the functionality here seems a bit weird. You're like, why are you subtracting 1 from player and setting that into your last index? So, the reason we're doing this is we want to loop this as many times as we have players. Again, coding starts at 0, not 1. So if we have 1 player and our first index is 0, we also want our last index to be 0, not 1. Otherwise, it will run twice. There you go. So make sure you set this. Do your for loop. The for loop runs in a bunch of different ways. So you can just click on for loop, go to flow control, and hit this for loop. This is the one you're looking for, not the array one, because we just want to loop for an automated number of times. Okay. Then in the loop body, what we want to do is create and add a new player detail structure. The player detail structure is what we made here, remember? What we want to do is for every player that the game instance thinks we should have, or the game instance knows we have, we want to make a player for it. And that way we can fill out the array. This is where it gets really useful, because we can remove players from this array or add players to this array this easily. So players drop out or log in or whatever, we can do it just by adding or removing a value from this array. Now, the way you kind of do what I'm doing here is use your game instance reference and get your players. Like this, get players. Now, this is the array we set up right here. Okay? If you drag off of this and type add, you'll get this box, which you can see below. Then, when you can use this box, drag off of the blue node here, and then look for make player details, or make whatever you called your struct. It'll be here, you don't have to search for anything. And what it'll do, you can see, it makes this box I have to my left. I'm going to delete this one. Drag these in together. What it does is it makes a player details structure, makes an instance essentially, and it gives it default values. So 0, this will actually be empty. I changed it to default so it has a field, but you can leave it empty. and then the character class. You can change all this right now, but you don't need to. What we want is essentially when we find these players, we decide we want to make them all default, but just add them to the array so we can change them later. Then you're good to go with the construct. Now I know that was pretty in-depth, but actually that's probably the majority of the work there. There are some changes you're going to have to make. Like here, instead of using character class, we're going to have to now use our new players array that we made, but it'll start to become very easy to understand as you start to use it. It's just a lot to take in. Now, in your grab coin event, which we talked about, this is when we press the space bar to either grab or release the coin. Everything stays the exact same. Even here, this is the exact same. We just change what we're doing here. So, I know that sounded confusing. Let me rephrase. This stays the exact same. We're just changing the way we implement it. So remember, we have determine coin placement. And this is where we check basically if the coin is over top of any of the players, the character images. So if the coin has intersected with any of these, we want to set the player one to currently be these characters, respectively. You don't have to change anything in this function, so don't worry. It's all the same stuff we went over in the last episode. Now, remember, we were returning this last time, as I said. It's right here. This was where we determined what class we were returning. Last time, I think we were throwing it into a switch statement, but the issue is, regardless, we weren't actually setting anything here. What we were actually doing is placing it. Great. It has the character class we want to use, and I believe we were setting a variable like player1 character class or something like that. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that, but what we can condense this, as you can see, on pressed now has just open level for the continue button. When we press the continue, all it does is open the level. All of our data is already stored and saved. So feel free to remove everything that you have on press continue button. We're going to be setting it earlier. Again, there's good reasons for that. Basically, instead of setting some variable off of your character class, drag it out and do a switch statement on the selection. Now, we'll get into this in a second. Let's cover this. This is the important part here, and basically what we're going to be doing for the rest of the episode. So remember, we added our new player for however many players we have. So if we have one player got added to the players array. If we have 4 players got added to the players array. So say we have 4 players so we can stay consistent. We got 4 elements in this array, 4 objects in this array. What we want to do is we want to set our player's character class when we change. That way we can also set the skin and things like that. Now, when we do multiplayer menus, we're not going to be hard-coding 0 here because we're going to have to use the character that actually dropped the coin, so keep that in mind. But for now, we want to get our game instance reference and get our player's array. It's the same thing as up here. I'm just doing it again down here. We want to get 0, so literally drag off get. I did get a reference. Reference is faster. It changes the actual one we are grabbing. So you can see when you do get with a reference instead of a copy, you get a little diamond. So if you do get copy, you'll see we get a circle here. And this is usually what you see me do because we can set something later. However, a reference is actually better for most cases. A reference changes the value in this array, right? So what I mean by that is if we copied this here, if we get this value and then we did some stuff with it, if we wanted our players array to actually update, we would have to set the values in it again. We don't want to do all that, copy all that over. What we want to do, get by reference, so just to be clear, get a ref, that's this right here. 0 because player 1 is the only one with control right now. We want to drag off of this and say set members in player details. And this is how we can set members directly in our array without changing anything, copying anything, losing any data. And what we're going to do is set our character class to our coin placement. Now when you do set members, you shouldn't have any variables. It'll just say struct ref and struct out. Click on your node, go to the pin options in the details panel, and then you can select your things. For me, I just selected character class. They're under character because when you look in the struct, I put them under category character. So don't worry about that if that doesn't match up. But just make sure as you click these nodes, as you click these checkboxes, you get little nodes for each of them so you can edit them. Any ones you don't edit will remain the same. So if you're not going to change them, I recommend not clicking on these boxes. That way you don't have to put anything in for them. We're only going to change the character class now, so we only want to click this one. Drag your coin placement result into here, and you're good to go. You've now changed your character. So what this section of code does is once we do this, now we are the mannequin character for that player in the array for the game instance. So our player array right here, 0, that's us because we're player 1, is going to update once we do this. Once we do this, we've now updated the character class to be mannequin 2. We're now mannequin 1. We're now mannequin 2. All we're doing, this same instance, the same variable, is changing between the characters. That is good. That's what we want. One last thing we need to do, and this is just a visual thing, is we need to update our images that are right here. So we need to actually update our images based on the skin and the character we have. Since we're just dropping the coin, we can always reset the skin to the first value, so that part won't be an issue, but we do need to have the selection of skins available. Okay, to do that, what we need to do is do a switch off of the character class, so we determine what image we want to display. Right now I only have mannequin, mannequin 2. Essentially, you will have every single character in your game in this switch. Now, we're going to be adding in a few more variables here. So we're going to have character 1 selected icons and character 2 selected icons. I'll explain what these are. In last episode, and I think maybe even episode 1 of the character selection screen, we added variables called character 1 icon, character 2 icon. So these are this is just a slate brush variable type. So if you click on your variable type, type slate brush, hit this one right here, that's all it is. Slate brushes are used for images and things like that, where you can just apply a texture to an object, essentially. Or an image to an object, however you want to do it. Okay, so that's all well and good, but what we actually need now is we want 2 different images. So if you look at the Super Smash Brothers game, your image in the box and your image in the selected panel are actually the same, but of course scaled differently. So we can do that here, and that's no problem. But what I decided to do, so that we don't have like a bunch of these icons, and again, feel free to put these in array on your own. I think I mentioned that last time, but for now I only have 2 characters. So what I decided to do is for the skins make different characters. That way we can determine what colors every character has, and we don't have to do any sort of hard coding like, oh, every character has 8 skins, because maybe you want certain character to have more skins or less skins than another. So what I have here is an array of slate brushes. So this is a slate brush, this is an array. To make a variable an array, you just look at the details panel, click on the object, and hit array. I think if you right-click on this, it makes it into an array, because that's what it looks like it's doing. Oh yeah, right-click to toggle type as an array. See, we just learned something new during the recording process, so there you go. But anyway, that's not important. The important part is this is an array, and it's going to hold our character image and all the skins we want for them. You can see here on the right, make sure you compile, otherwise it won't show up once you do that. Compile, save. You can see here on the right, you'll have something called default value now. What you can do is actually add elements to the array. I've already added 3, but by default I don't think you have any. You might have 1. Add some elements. Then what you can do is actually drag an image in here, or just select it from the list. So select your images. You may have different images for each, or you may just apply a little filter over it like I did. So I applied a filter, and I'll show you how to do that. But I've added 3. I have my standard, I have an orange, and a red for this guy. You have something called tint you can apply to the image. So you put your image in that you want. I still want my mannequin profile picture, but I put in the tint to be orange. You just literally click on this, and it's a little color picker, and you can change it. And then for this guy, I did the same thing, but made him red. Then I have character 2 selected icons. So character 2, mannequin 2. He's also got his own colors. He's got default, and he's got yellow, and he's got green. What we're going to do here is after we determine the class that we put the coin on, we want to grab player 1 character image. That is this. That is the big images. Player 1 character image. It's player 1 because we're using 0 here for player 1 was putting this coin here. So we won't be using any of the other character images in this episode, but you can use these accordingly for whatever player is setting them. So player 1 character image is the far left one. We want to get character 1 selected icons, where we have these. Get the first index, because we can always reset it once the player has dropped the coin. We don't need to keep their skin unless we want to. And then we want to set the brush of the character image. So again, if your image was a variable, you can click on it and drag it right into the scene. And then get, and then set brush. Right here. And then you just drag in your slate brush array right here. And you're good to go. And delete that. Otherwise, if it was mannequin 2, we still want player 1 character image, because remember, that's player 1. Character 2 selected icons, because we want mannequin 2 now. Get the first one and set the brush. Okay, we're now good to go with all these functions. The last thing we have to do is this new function we're going to make called determine character skin. And this is how we determine what character, or excuse me, what skin to go to next. Once we've clicked on the character, it needs to adjust to the proper color. So if we are on this guy, we click this guy, we want to go to orange, red, and then back to white. These are all your buttons that I said add and make variables. If you click on each of your buttons, the ones that are hiding behind your big images here, go to the details panel, scroll all the way down, and hit on pressed for all 5 of them, or all 8 of them, however many you have. It'll make these new functions. These are all the exact same thing, I just changed the player index, so don't worry about that for now. But just add all 5 of them, make a new function. I called it determine character skin. So we already had determine coin placement. Add a new function, call it determine character skin, or whatever. But this is to determine what skin we're going to use for a character. Okay. Oh yeah, and also it takes in a player index. You'll see this here. The way you add a player index is once you've created your function, you'll automatically go to it, but double click it to bring it up at any point. When you click on your function here, or just when you're inside of it on the details panel, you can see inputs and outputs. We want an input of a player index. It's just an integer. It's just this. I'm calling it player index. This is how we know what character to change. What player is, for what box we should change the color for on the character. That was a mouthful. Basically, this determines player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4, player 5. It's our player index. It's the color we should be changing. Okay. Now, in our function, what we're going to do is grab our game instance reference and our players. You should see pretty good pattern here. This time, we're using get with the player index put into it, because for several reasons. So first of all, if we're player 1, then we should change the correct image. So when this button is pressed, when the player 1 character image is pressed, we want to change the player 1's character. Now, if he drops out or whatever, and the order changes, we don't want everyone's characters to get screwed up. So we have to know whose character skin we want to change, and we actually have to make sure they can change it to do this. Long story short, get your players array, use your player index that we're passing in. For player 0, or for player 1, we're going to use player index 0. For player 2, we use 1, player 3, 2, 4, 3, 5, 4. Okay? Easy way to remember, take the player number, so player 1, and just subtract 1, like we did for the for loop above, and this is how you get the proper index. Player 1 minus 1 is 0, player 2 minus 1 is 1, and so on. Okay. So we use our player index here. We break player details. This is a ref, you can tell. A, because it says by ref in the output there, but also because it's a diamond instead of a circle. Type break. Break player details. Because we're not going to be setting a value here, but we want to determine what the character class is, so we know what slate brush array down here to use to change the color. break the player details, grab the character class, drag it into selection here. So do a switch on your character class again, right here. If it's a mannequin, we want to call our change character class function. Don't worry, we're going to make a new function to do the rest of this. But if it's mannequin 2, we want to use the other array on the change character class. Excuse me, change character skin. So make a new function. Last one for today. I called mine change character skin. So we were determining the character skin. Essentially, we were determining what character we actually were, to be honest. But then we made a new function called change character skin. This is where we're going to change the skin. If it's the mannequin, use character 1. If it's mannequin 2, use character 2. Just make sure your icons match up with the character you're trying to change. Now, in our new function, in our last function, we want to have 2 inputs. We still want to have our player index because it's still going to be useful here, but we also want to have our character icon array so we can switch between them. So add these 2 here. This is your slate brush array, same as your variables down here. Okay? And then this is still an integer. That way, that way when you call your change character skin function here, you can use your proper array to pass in. Okay? Alright, now to finish the change character skin function, this is the last thing we'll be doing for today, and at this point you will have a very nice character select screen. So, again, you should see a pattern. We're going to use our game instance reference, get our player's array, and then use the player index in our array. We're going to break it, again, just like we did in the last function. This is the exact same process we did here. Exact same. Except this time, we're going to be grabbing the character skin. So remember, our character skin is just an integer. All it is a value, a whole number, 0, 1, 5, 10, whatever. And it determines which element in the array we are, so we know what skin to go to next. You can see when you click on an icon here, these are your indices. So we have 0, 1, and 2. So when we're grabbing this character skin, we're saying, okay, which one are we on, and can we go to another one? So if we're at 0 and we add 1, we'll be yellow. So when we click it once, we'll go to yellow. If we click it twice, we'll go to green. If we click it again, we won't be able to actually have another index, so we have to restart the array and start back at 0. That's what all this functionality is doing right here. So after you've done all the stuff here where we break it and grab our character skin, add literally integer plus integer, and just add +1 right here. What we're doing is saying if we go to the next element of the array, will we still have a valid index? So off of our character icon array, remember, this is, this is our variables here. We pass these in so that we could know how many skins they have and what skins they are. If different characters have different skins, this will still work because we're going to grab the length of the character array. Okay? We say, if we add 1 to the current character skin, is it less than the length of the array? If it is less than the length of the array, our character skin +1, so we'll have 1 right now. If it is less than that, which it is, because the length right now is 3. 1, 2, 3. And I know it's weird that the indices are 0, 1, 2, and the length is actual number, but that's how it works. So anyway, if it's less than it, and it is, we have 0 plus 1 is 1. 1 is less than 3. So it is less than that. Then we want to actually increment it, and then we want to get that new object to display to the image, that new picture in the array. So if it is less, we go game instance reference, players. We get our player index. That's what this is. That way we're editing the right image. We're going to be doing that a lot. Then remember to get it by ref, drag off. Then we set members in player details like we always do. And once you've done that, once you've set members in player details, click on it and add character skin as a pin. This time we don't care about the name or the class, but we do care about the skin. And instead of using the player index that we're setting as the skin, we actually want to set our incremented character skin value. So if we were at 0, we added 1. You can see the line is going into the set members. So now we're at a character skin of 1. character skin of 1 means we're at a 1 on here. So we'll actually be at the orange guy right now. Okay? Now, I'm not going to get into these last nodes just yet. It's the very last part, but let's go over the other scenario. Now, if we take our character skin, say we're on 2. We're on 2 right now. If we add 1 to it, we're on 3. The length of the array is 3, because remember, the length doesn't start at 0. So 1, 2, 3. So 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 is not less than 3, so this is false. So we say, okay, we don't have another image to go to. We should restart the array and start back at 0. We get our game instance reference, our players. We use our player index right here to get our value in the array. Then we set members and player details. Same way as always, set members right here. But this time, once we add the character skin, we don't drag anything into it. We instead set it to 0. We restart the array. We say, nope, go back to the end. We've run out of skins for you to use. Now, in both cases, we do the same logic afterward. In both cases, all we do is break our character skin, get our image, and set the brush. Now, you could do this in one node, and it probably would be better too. You can see these are the exact same lines of code, or exact same nodes in Blueprint. So there's a reason I'm doing it this way, and it's for multiplayer input. I'll change it later to make it a little bit better. So feel free to only copy this code once and drag both lines into it, like this. So feel free to delete this. But otherwise, I'm going to leave it because I'm going to edit it later, and it'll make more sense later. But for now, all you need to know is after you've edited your struct and set your new value, you have a struct out pin. What you can do from this is now break it again. So drag off and you'll see break player details like we've done before. You want to grab your character skin value from that. And then you want to set your brush to that character image. What you want to do here is set your image to the updated value, right? So the updated skin. You can see I'm pulling off of the player details struct, the struct out pin we have, and I'm going to be saying break right here. Now what we can do is grab the character skin from this, and we're going to get our value in the array. So remember, our character skin is an integer. We just set all that. So if this is 2 in the array, we want to grab this out of the icons. This is why we have this as an input. Not only are we using it for the length, but we can also bring it up here. You can see I've just done a crazy little bring it up above everything so we can use it later. We're going to use this array and just type get. And you can get a copy here. This doesn't matter because this is just the icons. But here you go. Now that we have that array, we can use our new character skin value that we just set here and here. Get the value that we're on. So if our character skin was 1, we're here. Character skin was 2, we're here. 0, it's here. And set the brush. This is the same way we set the brush when we determine the coin placement right here. This is the exact same logic. Alright guys, and that is it for the character select screen. Now, I know this is a very long episode. Longest episode we've recorded, but I think it's worth it. There are 2 more things we have to do. They're both significantly shorter than this, but just some changes you should be aware of. In your character HUD, your widget that has all your player stuff. So remember I said here, if I set my character, the other images don't show up like they used to. Again, not really a bug. It's more because we don't have the other player controllers yet, and I haven't set up functionality to work with just the keyboard. If you set your num players to be 4 by default, that'll be fine. Your character HUD, though, will have to change a little bit. What we do need to check for now, because we've changed the game instance reference and we're actually going to be using it once we load into the game mode, there are some things we need to change. And unfortunately, it means we have to change for everything. Now, we won't be changing anything in the actual event graph. It'll be all the individual bindings. So as long as you still have your game instance reference, you're good to go. If you never set it up, I'm pretty sure we set it up, but just to be triple, quadruple sure, do the same thing you did in the character select screen to get your game instance reference. Go ahead and add a variable, game instance reference, then search for your game instance class minus base game instance. get your object reference, and set it in your construct. Now, in your bindings, we need to use this literally everywhere. So, player 1 character name. We want to do a check to get our game instance reference, get our players, get the length, make sure it's greater than or equal to your player number that you're trying to bind. Now, if it's not, we're going to actually hide the images. We're not going to get into all that today because this is already so long. But what we're doing here, if you only have one character like I have for now, you still have set up for 4 images, right? And we do this. We still have 4 images set up. We will get an error or a crash depending on where you're playing it from if we don't set up logic to avoid trying to access elements of an array that don't exist. So, since we're trying to get player 1 character name here, we're going to grab our players, get the length, and then check if it's greater than or equal to 1. If we have more than 1 player in the game, we can access player 1's character name. If we have less than 1 player in the game, we won't be able to access player 1's character name. So we don't want to do any logic with it. If we do, if this branch is true, we want to get our game instance reference, get index 0 because we are player 1, get their character class, and display it. Okay. This stuff's all the same. I didn't actually change anything with this. I just changed the stuff from the character class to using the player's character class, and from I added this additional check here. Now, you have to do this for all the ones where it's get player name. You don't have to do it for the damage counters. You can see the damage counter can stay the same because the damage counters are only relevant in-game. So you can still use the game mode references if you'd like. You can feel free to switch them over. It won't hurt anything. It'll probably be a bit neater, but I'm not going to go over that today because of the length of the episode. So all your damage counters are good. Your character names. Now, the way your character names work, they're all the same, but just make sure you account for the proper one. So if we're player 2 character name, we have to make sure our length is greater than or equal to 2 characters. Because if we don't have 2 players in the game, then we can't access player 2 character name. Same as player 1, but check for length of 2. Also, since we're player 2, we want to grab the 1 index from players instead of 0. Okay. Player 3 character name, same deal. Check for 3, check for 2. And let me find player 4. Player 4 character name, check for 4, check for 3. Okay. Last thing, we need to look at our image brushes. So our image brush is we do the exact same logic as you can see here, but make sure you just apply this to all 4 of these. Check, since we're player 1, check if it's greater than or equal to 1, and make sure player index 0 exists. So, okay, if we have more than 1 player, if we have 1 or more players, we can get the image for player 1, right? It's the same logic here. I'm just going over it because this does need to be applied everywhere. So 1, 1, 0. For 2, if I could find it, it's going to be 2, 1. It's going to be 3, 2. And lastly, it's going to be 4, 3. Same logic otherwise. Okay? Now your character HUD is done. Your character select screen is done. The last thing, for real guys, the last thing we need to do is just update a small little change or make a small little change here in the base game mode BP. So in your game mode blueprint, we were previously using a method to spawn characters that did not care about how many characters we had. Now that we're going to be using data from our players array, though, we do have to make sure the number of players is valid before accessing it, just like we did in the HUD. So you can see we do 2 things here, and it's the same thing essentially. Basically, to make the game mode play and spawn characters properly, and to assume that a character has been spawned, we need to make sure that our game instance reference, and if you don't have one, you set it up the same way. You get the game instance, cast to your game instance, make a new variable, grab the type, set it to be the type that we made in code. Whoops. Right here, grab your object reference, you're good to go. Get that reference, grab the players from it, grab the length, make sure there's at least 1 or more players in the player array. That means, yes, we are valid, we have at least 1 playable character in the game, We are good to go. Continue on. Then, since we know this is player 1 regardless, we get our game instance reference, grab our players, get index 0 since that is player 1, get the character class, and then perform the logic. All this logic about creating characters and possessing and unpossessing existed in the past, so I'm not going to go over all of it, but just make sure you do change this since we've changed from the game mode players array to the game instance players array. Okay, and after that, the last lines of code you need to add are the same thing, but when in your spawn player function, just like we did it out in the event graph, make sure you also update it from using the game mode stuff to using your player instance stuff. So after you spawn your base player controller, you grab your game instance reference, grab your players, get player 1 or whatever. This will update as we put in support for multiple indices and such. Grab your character class, and then do this. If you've been following the tutorials, you'll know exactly where this goes. Even just looking at it, this is in the spawn players function. You can see it's right after I spawn my controller and right before the switch. Same with the event graph. It doesn't really matter if it's confusing right now because we're going to be editing it in future episodes, but just to make it work and not give you any errors, after your player start tag is taken, make sure you get your player's reference, and before your switch, make sure you grab it to use that as the character class. Guys, that was a mouthful. But now you will be able to switch around your characters as much as you want. Sign in, drop out, whatever you want. Switch your characters. It'll always reset to the proper value. You can see as I switch them, they reset. I can also do this and reset. There you go, guys. You have a functioning character select screen that works just like Smash Bros. Of course, it's not as polished, not as nice to look at. We'll continue to work on it in the future. But this is a very, very good starting point and can do essentially all the functionality that the Smash Brothers screen can do that is required to play the game. A lot of it is just flair or adding your name or things like that we don't have yet. Alright, guys. I'm Shawnthebro. If this video helped you, please subscribe. It's the most important thing you can do for this channel, and it genuinely takes a lot of work to read all that off. Anyway, if you had any issues with this video, I know it was a long video, feel free to reach out to me on Discord. Come join the Discord server. I can't link it in an iCard, but it is in the description. Just look for Discord. I'll be happy to help you. I can send pictures and videos, and we have other people in the community who are more than willing and happy to help you. So we can get any issues you had while following this tutorial sorted out. Lastly, if you'd like to come support us on Twitch and get to know me a little bit better, more than just a YouTube personality, you can come see me on Twitch at Shawnthebro, or twitch.tv/Shawnthebro27. We do Souls Wednesday and Resident Evil Friday. So we play a bunch of Dark Souls games. We actually just started Dark Souls 2. And we play Resident Evil games on Friday, where we're going through Resident Evil 4 at the current time of this. So anyway, guys, again, I'm Shawnthebro. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.